Howdy, welcome back to even more Bystial content. I have had an absolute blast testing these Bystial cards, but it turns out I wasn't even talking about the best version of Bystial in my last video. So this time we're going to be covering branded Bystial. So this is seeing a lot of success in the OCG. You know, Tier Element is dominating over there. And the Bystial cards are very nice counters to Tier Elements because they act as DD Crows for all the effects in Grave. So branded Bystial is kind of like the third best deck based on top cut representation over in the OCG. So let's talk about branded Bystial in this video. We're going to start with just a couple of branded fusion combos, so like, you know, branded fusion plus a discard, things like that. Because we all know by now how powerful this card can be just on its own. It just does so much by itself. So this is going to be kind of like a standard play here. So we're going to activate the fusion. We're going to send an Albaz and a Bystial Saronir. So when this card is sent to the grave, even off of like the branded fusion, we can send a Bystial monster or a branded spell trap from our deck to the grave. So we get to summon the Lubellion here, and we get to trigger both the Saronir and the Lubellion. We're going to discard a card to make the Albion. And then off of the Saronir, we are going to dump the Lubellion, which we will use later. Or right now, actually. We're going to summon the Lubellion by tributing a level 6 or higher Dark Dragon. And what we can do here is use its effect to set the rebranded. Now rebranded, if a card is banished, or if a light or dark monster is banished, you can target one of those monsters, place it on the bottom of the deck, and if you do, draw a card. So it's a continuous spell that generates you advantage. But also, if your opponent normal or special summons a monster, you can target a Bystial in your grave and summon it. So we do have the Saronir for that. And then we're just going to go straight to the end phase, which will trigger the Albion. So we're going to set the branded beast. And then during our opponent's turn, we now have the rebranded and the branded beast, as well as the Lubellion, who's just like a big bungus, 3k defense, kind of hard to get rid of. And then we have the branded fusion and the Saronir in grave. So let's say our opponent just like normal summons or special summons anything at all. This will trigger the rebranded, letting us summon the Saronir from grave. Now Saronir, of course, pretty good stats on its own. But at any point during your opponent's turn, if you want to destroy a card they control, we can use the branded beast. We can tribute a dragon monster, so we're going to tribute the Saronir. We're going to pop the card they control. And then what this is going to do is it's going to trigger Saronir again, letting us dump the branded Retribution. Now this card is very, very useful in the Bystial version of branded because it's so easy to send off of either Saronir or the main deck Albion Dragon, the level 7 Dark. So you have two ways to get to this. Now the on-field effect is decent, but the graveyard effect is really where it's at. Because at any point during our opponent's turn, we can banish it from the grave to add any branded spell trap back to our hand. So we just get to recycle the branded fusion. Right? So we get the pop, we get to recycle the branded fusion, and then we have the rebranded and the beast, which is just going to continuously draw cards and pop cards, special summon back our monsters from the grave. It's just going to continuously loop advantage over and over again. The resource management in this deck is really where it shines. Like if you can maximize your resource management, this deck is super strong. And of course, having the Bystials being all DD Crows is also quite good as well. So if you've been wondering why Linitis has been getting bought out lately. It's because of this deck. Its end phase effect is during the end phase. This card was sent to the graveyard. This turn, you can add a polymerization normal spell or a fusion normal spell. Unfortunately, you can't add super poly, but there are some other funny fusions that you can add. So this is going to be a bit of a funnier combo rather than last one, which was more practical. So we're going to use the same exact materials here for the Lubellion. We're going to activate the Saronir and the Lubellion, but this time we're going to shuffle back the Albaz and the Saronir to make the Albalinitis, and the Saronir is going to go ahead and dump the Lubellion. Now Lubellion, you can summon it by tributing any dark dragon, so we're going to tribute the Albalinitis, summon the Lubellion here, get the branded beast using the Lubellion effect, and then during the end phase, you get to search for any normal fusion spell. So you can get something like Fusion Destiny. If you want to meme super hard, you can get Red Eyes Fusion. I don't know why you would ever do that, but you can. But since this deck is pretty much only going to play fusions anyway, you can justify getting away with a Fusion Destiny, especially since it's now very easily searchable off of the Albalinitis. So if you're up against a deck that like folds really hard to DPE, not a bad play to go for. Plus the branded beast, the only requirement is that you control a Byssted. You can tribute any dragon to activate its effect, so we do leave the Lubellion just kind of like sitting on the field for no reason. But you can use it as the tribute fodder for Beast if you really want to. And obviously rebranded is not a better option because we use the Saronir as fusion material. But this is just to showcase that you can search like really funny stuff like Fusion Destiny, which against slower matchups might actually be pretty good to sit on 2-3k bodies and then just wait until next turn you can drop a DPE. Now, what happens if your opponent is playing Mermail and they rip like 4 cards out of your hand? So now that the only thing you have is branded fusion, you don't have any discard materials for the Lubellion, or say like the rest of your hand is so broken that that the only card you're left with now is just the branded fusion, which is not optimal. And I would not recommend going for this pretty much ever. This is just horribly inefficient, but this is what you can do. We're just going to go straight for the Albalinitis. We're not going to worry about the Lubellion, we're just going to go straight for it. Which will trigger the Saronir, of course, dumping the other Lubellion. And then we can just tribute this, summon the Lubellion, get the Beast. You can also get rebranded here, which can summon back the Saronir. But without the Beast, or maybe you already drew the Beast, I don't know. Without the Beast, rebranded isn't super useful, so we're just going to get the Beast here. And then of course during the end phase we can add another branded fusion next turn, and hopefully we can just start popping off from there. But this is just a simple, like, branded fusion can get you to Lubellion Beast with just 1 card, and then you have like the 4 other cards in your hand to play with. Like if you have Alubers and stuff like that, you can just do branded shit. And now speaking of Aluber, here's what we can do with Aluber if we draw it instead of branded fusion. It opens up like a tiny bit more options than previously because that extra body does help a lot. So we're just going to have to normal summon it here. I guess you could also do this with branded opening as well. Like if you draw opening, you can summon the Aluber and then add the fusion that way. But if you just have to normal summon it, then you just got to. We're going to get the branded fusion, of course, the best card in the game. We're going to activate it. We're going to send the Lubellion and the Albaz this time. We're not going to worry about the Lubellion because this board is going to end with a very particular type of interaction. we're going to use the Albion. We're going to banish the Aluber on field and the Albaz in grave to summon the Lubellion. So we're kind of doing this backwards. And then we're going to use the Lubellion. Oh, sorry, we're not going to use the Lubellion. We're just going to tribute the Albion to summon out the Lubellion. These names are... Why do all of these cards have the same name? I'm sorry. It's hard. We're going to summon out the Byssted Lubellion to set the Beast. And then during the end phase, alright, again, you know, this doesn't look great, but during the end phase, we're going to get Branded Expulsion. What this card does, we tribute a fusion monster, and then we can summon 2 non-fusion monsters that are banished or in either graveyard. If the monster we tributed has Fallen of Albaz as material, we can summon both monsters to our side of the field. So, of course, we have the Albaz and the Aluber here. And of course, this is either graveyard, so if you really want to, you can like use this as like a pseudo DD Crow for your opponent. Like, if they try to summon something from grave, you can just summon it to your field instead. So just for the sake of example here, like if our opponent's on a deck like Ad Ignister, any deck that likes to summon from the extra deck, right, like let's say they summon any kind of extra deck monster here. Right, we can tribute the Lubellion because it has Fallen of Albaz as one of its requirements. So this will let us summon both the Aluber and the Albaz back to our field. And of course, both of them will trigger on summon. So Albaz, we can just pitch a random card, and we get to fuse on our opponent's turn into a Mirror Jade if they have a Fusion Synchro Xyz or Link monster. So this is like a weird way to get into the Mirror Jade. And then of course Aluber will search follow-up for the next turn in the form of Branded Fusion. Or any other fusion you want, honestly. Right, so we have the Lubellion and the Beast. Also, instead of Expulsion, you can search like any other cards, like maybe branded in red. Because you can just use the Lubellion as fodder for the Beast. And then if you have any Despia monsters in grave, or like an extra Albaz in grave, you can search branded in red instead of the Expulsion, which will give you access to a card like Guardian Chimera on the opponent's turn. But if your opponent folds really hard to like this whole Albaz into Mirror Jade, like on their turn, like some decks really do just fold to that. Like if they summon a gigantic Sprite and then you just Mirror Jade, you Albaz it away. Like, they need some crazy extenders to be able to play through the Super Poly and the Mirror Jade and the Beast. You know, plus that was like a 2-card combo, so you would have 3 other cards to work with here. So that's a nice little interaction that you can have just because of that extra body with Aluber. Alright, now we're going to move into some a little bit different stuff here. So typically we've been sending the Byssted cards off of the Branded Fusion, but what if you just like open a card like Lubellion? If you just hard draw it plus an Aluber or plus a Branded Fusion. So we're going to normal summon the Aluber, add the Fusion as usual, and then we're going to Fusion for Lubellion by sending the Albaz and the Tragedy. So we're going to get into a little bit more of the branded side of things here, while also, you know, of course, having the Byssted monsters. So we're going to use the Lubellion and the Tragedy here. Both of these will trigger. We're going to discard the Byssted Lubellion for cost, of course. We're going to add the Ad Libitum. And then we're going to fuse into the Albion using the Albaz and the other Lubellion, the Fusion Lubellion. Then we can trigger the Albion. So this gets super complicated here. We're going to fuse the Aluber and the Ad Libitum for the Masquerade. Now this will summon back the Aluber, which won't get its effect or anything. And then we can tribute the Albion to finally summon the Lubellion. Now what you can do, you can also like pitch the Lubellion to add a Byssted monster to use as discard fodder instead. But we're keeping it really simple here. We're gonna add the branded beast off of the Lubellion, just pop that baby right on the field, and then during the end phase, of course, we'll get the Albion to set the branded in red. And let's say, for example, opponent like sets up 2 cards that we would want to destroy, like make 2 monsters or something in the back line. We can use the branded in red because we do have the Tragedy in grave. And then this will let us help us go for the Guardian Chimera play. So you'll have the Masquerade and the Aluber on field, and then you'll have the Tragedy in hand. So you can pop 1 or 2 cards if you want to. You might want to keep the Masquerade, so you would just use 2 cards in hand and just the Aluber on field, and that will pop 1 card. But in the sake of this example, this will trigger the Tragedy and the Chimera. So the Chimera will pop 2 cards and draw a card, and then the Tragedy will let us add an Aluber for follow-up for next turn. Yeah, and like I said, instead of just discarding the Lubellion off of the other Lubellion, you can use its effect first to get something like a Saronir, and then when you discard the Saronir, I think it will let you send like a branded Retribution to the grave as well. So you could also have the Retribution to add back the branded in red or the branded fusion during your opponent's turn, or even during your turn as well. So it gives you even more follow-up here if you want to pitch the Lubellion first before you discard. Alright, and here is going to be Fusion plus Lubellion instead of Aluber plus Lubellion. They make near identical board states. It's just a matter of which one you draw. You have to take a slightly different route to get there. So let's just rip this off the top here. We're gonna make the Lubellion with the Tragedy and the Albaz again, just like last time. So we're gonna trigger both. We're gonna pitch a random discard this time instead of pitching the Lubellion to make the Albion. And then Tragedy will add the Aluber, so we're in a similar position as last time, just taking a slightly different route. Now here we can, like I mentioned in the last combo, you can pitch the Lubellion to add like a Magnamute, so this will put it in grave and give you an additional card as well. We're going to normal the Aluber, we're going to add the Despia Theater. Whether or not this card is going to end up being played in the deck, I'm not sure. It really depends on how much of a Despia package you're running. But again, at this point, it's kind of up in the air. So I'm including it just because it's an option, and it's one of the best options that I found, just to like maximize your turn 1 board. We're going to tribute the Albion to summon the Lubellion here. We're going to get the Beast as usual. And then we can special summon the Magnamute by banishing the Tragedy. Now this will get rid of the Despia in grave if we go for a branded in red, but that's what the Theater is for. So I haven't talked about Magnamute yet this video. If it's special summoned, during the end phase of the turn, you can add a dragon monster from your deck to your hand. So it doesn't get anything now, but it will later. So we're going to activate the theater here, and we're going to make a masquerade using the Aluber and the Magnamute. So now this will put a Despia in grave, so that we can trigger the Branded in red during our opponent's turn. And then the Magnamute will add the Druid Worm. Now the Druid Worm is the best thing to add off the Magnamute, because it combos super well with Beast. So basically, if this card is sent to from the field to the grave, you can target an opponent's special summoned monster and send it to the grave. So it's not a destroy, it's not a banish, it's a send. So it can out like really annoying things. Plus, it has that same DD Crow effect where you can banish a light or a dark and summon it to your field during your opponent's turn if they control a monster. So this works really well with the Beast, because you can DD Crow an opponent's monster, summon the Druid Worm, tribute the Druid Worm with Beast, pop a card on the field, and then since Druid Worm was sent from the field to the grave, you can send a special summoned monster to the grave. So the Druid Worm plus the Beast is like 3 interactions just on their own. And then of course you still have the Masquerade burning your opponent, you have the Branded in red to go for any fusion you want during your opponent's turn, because you do have the Aluber, and you do have plenty of material. And now here's another card that you've probably also heard about. This is the Branded in High Spirits. This card is very weird, but also very powerful. Basically, it lets you send a fusion monster from your extra deck that is the same type as like a monster in your hand. So rather than explaining it, I'm just going to show it to you. First, we're going to pitch the Lubellion to add the Saronir. Then we can activate the High Spirits, which will reveal the Saronir, which is a dragon. So we're going to send a dragon from our extra deck to the grave in the form of Alba Linitus, and we are going to add a dragon that we're going to add a monster that mentions Fallen of Albaz, which of course Albion, the main deck Albion, mentions Fallen of Albaz. So this is super cool, because we're going to get to trigger the Saronir, we're going to send the Branded Fusion, and then we're going to activate Lubellion, there's too many names, dude. Activate Albion, send the Retribution, again, like I said, super easy to get this card in the grave in this deck, and then we can trigger the Retribution. You can trigger it in the same chain as Albion because it sends for cost, which is kind of funny. We're going to add back the Branded Fusion, and then Albion will resolve, shuffling it back into the deck to draw a card. So now, we have somehow went from High Spirits and a Bystial monster into the Fusion, and then plus a draw. So we're back, we started with 2 cards, we ended with 2 cards. And then we also have the Alba Linitus in grave, which will trigger during the end phase. So that's like 3, we're like +1 by now. And we also have the Lubellion in grave, which will plus us even more. As you can see here, we can just use the fusion and go for all kinds of stuff here. Tragedy, add Aluber, Lubellion, trigger. Make the Albion effect. We're going to banish Tragedy and Saronir this time to summon Quiritis. Like, this is kind of weird, but you'll see in a sec where this goes. Aluber's going to add the theater. We can use the theater to fuse these 2 for the Masquerade. Now, this isn't, super optimal, but if you have like any fairy, like the Quiritis is kind of like a pivot point to get to the Masquerade, but you can summon it back with the theater if you have like a stray Despia monster on the field, right? Because it was properly summoned. It might not be a whole bunch of advantage now, or it might not be very useful now, But later down the line, you can just start like looping these with your theater and your choritis. So it's very nice just to have. And then of course we can tribute the Albion as usual for the Lubellion, since we did put that in grave. This will let us get the beast. And now we can trigger not only the Alba Leonidus, but also the Albion. So we can add like any normal spell fusion or a poly. And then Albion will set the branded in red. And this is partially why I wanted to put the Aluber in grave, was because we needed a target for branded in red. Yeah, so this is our inboard here. We have the Masquerade, the branded in red, the branded beast, the Despia Theater. We added the poly or any other fusion you want. Just based, this was all just off of like branded in high spirits. Like honestly, branded in high spirits plus any dragon can get you to something very similar to this, which is absolutely insane that that works like that. But of course, you know, having the Lubellion to get the Saronir, this will let you go into the branded fusion a lot easier. I'm not sure about Bystial ratios. Like I'm not a deck builder. Like ratios are not my thing. It's why I don't do deck profiles on my channel, because I am not a very good deck builder. But I will sit here and do combos for hours trying to figure out what the best thing to do is. So if you're wondering why branded in high spirits has been getting hype lately, it's because it can do things like this just solely on its own.